Hi, welcome back. We're going to talk about conclusions in this video. I just want to go back a couple of slides. I had a little more technical difficulty. So about this point, illustrates internal and psychological conflict. I wanted to mention when I was talking about the typical stories like man versus man, sometimes you see these books or these articles that say all stories fall under these 20 plots. A lot of times this is related to the internal psychological conflict. Sometimes in your story, if a conflict is driving the plot, it will be psychological in someone's mind, and the bare facts will not tell you what this psychological conflict is, so that's why you need the reflection. That's what that point was about. I'm not sure if it was clear before. I hope it is now. So conclusions, it's how to end your piece. As I note in this point here, it's difficult to do. Conclusions are hard. When I was in school again about learning about writing, if you're writing an academic essay, you want to restate your main idea, your thesis statement, in the end of the essay. That's how I was taught. You're doing creative nonfiction, it's not always that simple, and I don't think there's any perfect right way to do the ending. But I do want to make this point here at the end, the satisfying point. Conclusion should be satisfying if you can make it. It's a very good skill, and of course it's nice to finish a piece, have it feel final, feel like it's complete, but also if you're trying to sell a piece or you're trying to get people to read your work and like your work, you need a good introduction because that'll have a person continue to read, and you need a satisfying conclusion because they will feel good, they'll remember your piece. Having a good middle can be a lot more fun. It can get to really deep parts. It can really have beautiful development. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to sell a piece to a magazine, you want the editor to feel a really strong ending when they finish and feel like, yes, this was right, this was good, this was final. So by feeling final, I mean it's like something is complete. A conflict was brought up at the beginning and it's solved at the end. An idea was illustrated for a long time, and this ending adds something new. It comes to a new conclusion that we needed the journey of the development to come to. One type of ending I really like is in that essay we read about the woman who's a hostage, 460 days or whatever it was called. She talks about a few weeks where she almost escapes, and then at the very end she says, oh, well, this lasted for 460 days. I was there over a year. In Russian literature, there's the ending of one day in the life of Ivan Denisovich. He talks about his day. It's full of hardship and cool moments and struggle. And then at the end he says, this is what it was like every day for 10 years. It was this hard. Or more than 10 years. Those are really great endings because it illustrates something new. It takes the journey that we've seen and really leaves you with a very strong feeling. So like I was saying, sometimes the end can repeat or engage with the main themes of the piece. Sometimes if you have an interesting story, you need to remind the reader of some themes. This could be done through reflection or details. And it brings the thought process to the furthest point. In the David Foster Wallace essay, Consider the Lobster, and in most of his essays, he really develops every idea. He does a ton of research. It's like anything that occurs to him that he thinks about, he goes to the end with it. He researches every possibility. He thinks of every idea, and he tells you. And he's very specific and meticulous. He has a lot of details, and when you're finished you feel really good because you feel like you learned everything there was to learn. When I finished the Lobster Festival essay, I feel like, yes, I know everything I want to know, emotionally, physically, mentally, about the Lobster Festival. And that's another really strong way to conclude an essay, is to really bring every idea to as far as it can go. Okay, so I'm going to talk about conclusions and reflection in these two examples. So this is from Goodbye to All That by Joan Didion. I'll read it. We stayed 10 days, and then we took an afternoon flight back to Los Angeles, and on the way home from the airport that night I could see the moon on the Pacific and smell jasmine all around, and we both knew that there was no longer any point in keeping the apartment we still kept in New York. There were years when I called Los Angeles the coast, but they seem a long time ago. So if you read this essay and you remember, at the beginning she's leaving, she's just finished college, I guess, and she's leaving California to go to New York, that she has a lot of really Hollywood ideas about. She gets there. When she's in New York, she goes to cool parties, she learns about living there, she makes friends, she falls in love and gets married. And eventually her and her husband decide to move back to California. And these first 3 lines here are like developing the idea through, not through reflection, but through details. How long they stayed. They had an afternoon flight. They could see the moon on the Pacific and smell jasmine all around. So these are details showing her emotions changing, her becoming enamored in California, falling in love with it again. And here's some reflection in the bold. We both knew that there was no longer any point in keeping the apartment we still kept in New York. So even though this is just telling you what they're thinking, it's still kind of showing and not telling, because she's not saying we knew I was over New York emotionally, I was done. She's saying we agreed that there was no point in keeping the apartment. So it's showed through the lens of the agreement she comes to with her husband. It's not just, I left New York because I couldn't stand it anymore. And again, she says, there were years when I called Los Angeles the coast, but they seem a long time ago. So the years where she called Los Angeles the coast, it's like she's saying for a long time I still didn't think of California as my home again, through this detail. But then the bold is the reflection, but they seem a long time ago. So she's saying, for a long time I sort of felt like California wasn't home, but that's so long ago that now it is home, and I'm glad that it's home. And also, by showing it's a long time ago, she's showing that she's matured. The essay is a kind of coming of age. It's talking about her growing up, learning about life, getting married. And concluding in this is really strong because she left for New York at the beginning, she comes back at the end. She's a girl at the beginning, she's a woman when she comes back. So I think it's a really effective and satisfying ending. So here's an example from your reading today. This is the Against Joie de Vivre essay. So this is Philip Lope talking about his kind of conclusion that he doesn't really believe in enjoying life just for the sake of it. So I'll read it for you. But I can identify with the pre, if not the post stage of what Simon Weil describes. The soul knows for certain only that it is hungry. The important thing is that it announces its hunger by crying. A child does not stop crying if we suggest to it that perhaps there is no bread. It goes on crying just the same. The danger is not lest the soul should doubt whether there is any bread, but lest, by a lie, it should persuade itself that it is not hungry. So rather than reflecting through thoughts, he's using this quotation by this philosopher. I'm not sure if you say Weil or Weil or Weil, Simone Weil, but she's very, very cool. Very fun to read, kind of leftist, existentialist writer. But here he's using a metaphor about, enjoying life. If there's nothing to enjoy about life, he's kind of saying, you should still go on wanting to enjoy life. And the analogy is that it's a little kid. If there's no food, they'll still want more food. They'll still ask for more, even if it's not dinner time or there's no food because they're in a bad situation. So this is another kind of reflection, and it's a really good metaphor, and I think that's why he chooses it to conclude with. It really sums up the thesis of the essay. Okay, so in the next video we're going to talk about some tips for revising and editing. I think they'll be useful. So hold on, I'll be right back, and we'll talk about my tips.